All right, everyone, good evening. It's good to see everybody. We are in the final week and final chapter in our study in the book of Ecclesiastes. Covered quite a bit of material. Some of it has been sort of repetitive in the last couple weeks, but maybe explained or displayed in a little bit different fashion. But the themes, as we get closer and closer to this final chapter, certainly are starting to have a common tie. And if we look back at last week in chapter 11, towards the end of chapter 11, Solomon is wrapping up that chapter and specifically talking about and addressing a young man or a youthful person and giving him wisdom, exhorting him to use his youth, his energy, his passions and desires to serve God. He says, live out the desires and passions that come with youth, but keep in mind the judgment of God that comes with it. And he sort of continues that same, it just goes right into chapter 12 on that same topic. So let's get into it right away. Let me move this. Okay, so in verse 1, it says, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, when you will say, quote, I have no delight in them anymore." So pretty much tells him the same thing, but uses the word remember, and that's going to be a kind of common word or phrase used throughout these next several verses. It's not specifically used in this version, the New American Standard. Different versions, though, it uses the word remember several times, but says, remember your Creator. And I believe this is the first time that Solomon has addressed God as, quote, the Creator. And, you just kind of wonder why that is, or if there's really anything to it. But looking at it, you kind of wonder, he's trying to point out the light of God in the fact that he's truly the creator and owner of all things in this universe. That sort of will play and tie in as we go later in this chapter. But then says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come. And looking at that word evil, the evil days, it's the same word translated in Hebrew in chapter 11, verse 10. That same word was used meaning pain. And so you can really look at this as the evil days or the painful days to come. And that's really what he describes here in these next few verses. And certainly, the quote, I have no delight in them, and how he paints this as a very true statement. So going into verse 2 and 3, so he says, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain, in the day that the watchmen of the house tremble, and the mighty men stoop, the grinding ones stand idle because they are few, and those who look through windows grow dim. So from verses 2 through 5, he's sort of going to use some poetic, figurative language in explaining what he means by painful or evil days, and why someone would not really take delight in these things. In verse 2, keeping in mind of this being kind of a poetic, symbolic language, he's saying, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened. So he's saying, remember your Creator before those things happen. And then the clouds return after the rain. So some commentary I read was that lights being darkened maybe refer to vision. But kind of towards the end of that verse, when he talks about, and those who look through the windows grow dim, looking through the windows of one's eyes, growing dim. I think he's talking about one's vision deteriorating with age. So verse 2, how I read that is kind of the lights upstairs and in your mind, mental clarity, mental sharpness, your mental fitness, essentially. You think about here in Bakersfield when it rains, it's like probably my favorite times is after we have a big rainstorm and the day or two after the air is nice and clean, you can see all the mountains, everything is nice and clear. But when it's raining, everything is hazy and foggy and that sort of thing. He's saying here, well, remember your Creator before the days come where it rains and those storm clouds still stay, and it's just continually hazy. The lights of the sun and the moon and the stars are dimmed. And then in verse 3, he's talking about the watchman of a house. So somebody who would have been strong, who would have been fit for guard or for combat or battle, starts to tremble, and mighty men stoop. So I think talking about there, he's talking about your physical strength, your legs, back, shoulder, everything physically starts to break down. And the grinding ones stand idle because they are few. The commentary I got from that was it's your teeth. They start to, I guess, your chewing abilities, you start losing your teeth as you get older. At this time, no dentures or dentist care, so that to imagine that would apply. And then there at the end, talking about those who look through the windows grow dim, your eyes, your vision. He's talking about physical deterioration at this point, saying, remember God before these things happen. Serve God in your youth. Use the prime of your youth before these things come upon you.
Maybe old people back then used to also stare out the windows like neighborhood watch.
Oh, okay. Maybe.
Maybe that's always been a thing.
Certainly. I'll look more into that. All right, so verse 4. And the doors on the street are shut, and as the sounds of the grinding mill is low. So, and let's continue, actually. Let's finish the rest of the verse. And one will arise at the sound of the soft bird, the sound of the bird, and the daughters of song will sing softly. Talking about sound, hearing things. So the first part of verse 4, the sound of the grinding mill is low. And then kind of the end of that, the daughters of the song will sing softly. Your vision deteriorates, so does your hearing. And then the one who arises at the sound of the bird, it's kind of ironic. You lose your hearing ability. It starts to dull a little bit. But here in the middle of that verse, he's probably talking about someone who's a pretty light sleeper, and as one ages, has a hard time getting good quality sleep. One little sound or whatever movement, wakes you up in the middle of the night. Furthermore, verse 5, furthermore, men are afraid of high places and of terrors on the road. So he's saying, remember God before all these things happen to you, before you are afraid of high places, an elderly man or woman who's afraid to kind of walk out on a maybe unlevel piece of ground or elevated piece of ground, doesn't have quite the physical strength and balance they used to have, and the terrors of the road. Just, you tell maybe some of your grandparents or some of the elderly folks be careful when you're out doing such and such, and you're calling in and checking on them and that sort of thing. All tying back to Solomon describing a person who's lost and is limited physically in their life. The almond tree blossoms. Well, that's perfect, good timing with what's going on right now with all the almond trees around town blossoming. It's just, almost overnight, in 2 or 3 days, they push out big white blooms everywhere. And so he's talking about your hair going gray or going white. And then like the grasshopper drags himself along, and the caperberry is ineffective. So caperberry being relating to, at that time, was seen as a fruit that would boost sexual performance or desire. So if it's ineffective, the natural process of aging, one loses their sexual desire as they age. And finally, there at the end of verse 5, for the man goes to his eternal home while mourners go about in the street. So it describes all of these, using all of this poetic language and all these different things to describe what he calls the evil days or the painful days to come. And I think it's probably pretty accurate, using that figurative language and trying to understand somebody going through that is certainly not something that, it says it's going to find delight in them. It says, I would have no delight in them, and I can certainly, as a young person, attest to that. But it's kind of ironic because I hope I live to see these days. And it's a bit of a paradox in the sense that you want to live a long life, but the irony of that comes with that, in one way or another, these things do take hold of you if you stay on this earth long enough. I sort of have sadly got to see it sort of firsthand I've been lucky to have both sets of my grandparents. I'm 30 years old, and my mom's parents and my dad's parents are both still alive, but both suffering terribly for two different reasons. One cognitively and mentally, and the other physically and much physical pain. And it's a sad thing to see, but sort of what's described and mentioned multiple times throughout this book, it's a reality of life. And it's something that for a person who's solely living under the sun and who has dedicated their life to activities and goals here on this earth, once these things set into their life, truly have a hard time grappling with that. And the anti-aging process is such a big thing with technology now. It is huge. And so, but the point of why he's bringing this up is to remind this young man or this young person, these things are inescapable. And if you're lucky enough to live long enough, you will go through these things as well. Use your time wisely. Use your energy, your youth, your availability of your skills now while you can. And you might think, well, that only applies to young people. Define young people. Really, if we're having common sense, it applies to any able-bodied or able-minded person that can do something in this current day and age and focus on the day at hand. So that's kind of, continuing on with that same theme from chapter 11. He goes right into that as well in chapter 12. So moving on to, Carrie.
I can see why he does that. I remember there was a day when I thought 40 or 45 was old. I think, I don't know if I can remember that far back. But when you're that young, people will tell you that as you age, you're going to become debilitated. And you say, yeah, I know that. But you don't really take it to heart. It's pushed off way into the future. And you reach the point where you don't even imagine yourself getting there. Because, you're young and you don't have any problems. So why worry about them?
Right.
Well, the way that Solomon approaches it, he doesn't say you're gonna slow down when you're getting old. He starts enumerating all of the things that will go wrong, so that he brings home, hopefully, to the person that's not serious about getting old, what to look forward to and think twice about, like you say, wasting time in your youth.
Certainly. He really tells him the same thing in chapter 12 as he did at the end of chapter 11. He tells him to live out his youthful life and take advantage of all the things that come with that. But, we talked about last week, if he just left it at that, he'd be promoting an earthly, sinful life. Balances it out by, just remember, even in this time of youthfulness, where you feel like you're invincible in these things that he's describing here, down the road won't really apply to you. Your actions now will be held to judgment. sort of tells them the same thing in chapter 12, kind of like what you're saying is, yeah, young man, go ahead and live your life, but just know, these things are in front of you, and think about them. And uses this figurative language and poetic language probably sort of to paint a picture and to grab the attention of the reader, and just instead of saying, like your parents telling you, you'll get old or something, or, this will be you someday, kind of laugh that off. Someone who's seriously reading this and kind of pondering it, oops, oh boy, spoiled the whole thing. Someone who's seriously reading this and pondering that, who would apply to a younger person, should really be letting that kind of penetrate their heart and think about it. And it's something that I've had to think about at times. I see a hand somewhere. Janine.
I think it's important that we start very young talking about this, and especially then young marrieds talking about this and planning this is what will happen or what can happen.
Yeah.
A lot of people are just totally blown away
Mm-hmm.
when these days come upon them.
Mm-hmm. No, it's everyone kind of has their own perspective and story on how fast life goes. I mean, I was recently thinking about and talking about with someone that, okay, I'm 30 now. My dad had me when he was 30. He's now 60, and I can very much remember my childhood years and 7, 8 years old, and think, that was 20, 25 years ago. That time does not feel like 20, 25 years. Well, whatever that feels like in my mind, I just go ahead and duplicate that. I'm going to be right where, man, and they say it goes faster. And so, it's kind of crazy to think about. Then you're like, well, if I'm 60, I'm more than halfway through my life on this earth. And, we kind of laugh and joke about that, but like, that's a humbling thought of, wait a minute, I'm more than halfway through my life on this earth when I have to face death. I'm going to face these things. I know it's kind of it can lead to maybe a dark or depressing area, but we've talked about it multiple times in this class. These things are worth considering to really, this whole book is about addressing the hard, uncomfortable truths of this life. Kind of when your mind goes to those places, reading this, it's for that purpose. So, did you have your hand, Justin?
I think I'll make it quick, but there's a faithful response to that reality in those verses, and there's an unfaithful response to the reality. And that is one of the things as you get older, I've seen, some of the older family members and things die, and the faithful Christian ones tend to be at peace about this reality of life.
Yeah.
And people that are not Christians will regret their life. And as they go back overall, I should have done this, and I should have this, and get kind of spiteful about that reality of life. And
Certainly.
die well.
I mean,
Pray I die well.
the opposite of that. No, that's a good point. Just in this congregation alone, I've been here long enough, but you don't have to name names. There are multiple people who attend services here that are physically in pain, very much struggling, and have a really hard time getting here, but still come. And the attitude that they bring with that. And I know sometimes when we lead prayer or mention how inspiring and encouraging that is, but that's kind of to your point, Justin, of the opposite of that. That is someone who has made peace with these realities. That is someone who certainly feels all these pains, but has looked past the under the sun perspective, has made peace with it and accepted it, and is pushing through it. Dana.
So all of these things that happen right from the verse.
Yeah, verse 2, yeah.
All of those things will help you when you get to be 90, 95, 96, 97 to do what Justin said. You're like, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
I'm ready to go.
It's an interesting perspective.
But at 65, you're not ready to go. But you're aware that those things will happen.
But
Like Gary said, I mean, I know that will happen.
But sadly, how many people have we met or come across that live their lives solely under the sun, get to this position, and either are in a regretful, spiteful, self-pity type mentality, Yeah, I thought Larry.
If you go back to verse 1, isn't the remembering there your creator rather than dwelling on what's going to happen afterwards? This is something which I think we have a philosophical difference in looking at the book. I don't think it's depressing.
No, I don't think it is either.
Well, but that seems to be the case of what we're looking. Look at what's going to happen to you. All the bad things are going to happen. Look at this. You know, your teeth are going to fall out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
In this case,
It's pretty depressing.
well, at a time when you can't eat,
Right,
when there's not much food, that is a major thing.
totally.
And it's not something to be laughed at by those that are younger. In this case, I think what he's saying is remember when you're younger, you're created. In fact, that's the whole process, the whole purpose of this entire book. It's not think about how, don't be depressed because things are out of your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Recognize that that's reality.
Exactly.
There's a difference between recognizing reality and being depressed and just kind of down. Oh, this life is so miserable, but I'm going to try to live through it because God wants me to sigh.
Right. No, I share that perspective with you, Larry. I just kind of bringing up all different maybe viewpoints of how someone would address it. But I totally agree. Someone who has accepted those truths and realities and made peace with them and can actually have the opposite perspective of either enjoying and not taking for granted that those youthful years, knowing that that's coming and appreciating that now, and then also when those days do come, like Dana and Justin are saying, they are able to bear that with that mentality of making peace with it. But no, you're absolutely right. I don't know, Robert, Ian, who was first, sorry. Okay, go for it, Ian.
Preach everybody else's sermon contributed so far, but
Please, no, it's our last class, let's do it.
it seems to be both a reminder and an admonishment. It's a reminder to somebody who still has the ability
Sure.
that you should remember you were created, right? And to, if I can pull scripture a little bit out of context, in 1 Corinthians 6:20, talking about our bodies, and it says, "For you were bought at a price, therefore glorify God with your body." It's the idea that you've been given a blessing in this vessel. What have you done with it? And that's where the admonishment comes in. If you look at this and realize I have wasted my life not remembering my Creator, you know, I had all these good opportunities and squandered them. That's not to say you can't be saved, of course, but it should perhaps spark something in you that I should have been doing better.
Right.
I should have been remembering my Creator at the time. I didn't know what I had till it was gone.
Well, he ends that chapter 11 saying, these days are fleeting. And that's kind of the whole thing of what we're talking about here. So, all right, one more and then we'll get moving.
Yeah. You know, to kind of build on what Larry and Ian was saying, especially what Larry said, personally, I think chapter 12 should have started 2 verses earlier at the end of chapter 11. But
Right.
we have to keep this perspective in mind, that this is the preacher, in my opinion, looking at a younger person and saying, it's great that you're young. Live your young life. But keep this in mind before you get to the point that you're in the dark days where your body is completely broken down. Remember God now and not in these older days, because in these days to come, it's an encouragement to say, hey, when you're young, remember God. Don't live your life, but remember God now.
Exactly.
Another point that I don't think has been touched on yet is if you're someone who lives your life sinfully, prodigally, let's say, wastefully extravagant, when you're young, there's a lot of people who don't change when they get old, and you get set in your ways. And so you're more likely to be able to listen and say, oh, I'm still young, let me remember God now, versus someone who's lived the sinful life for 70, 50, 60,
Yeah.
70 years.
Yeah, at that point it's hard to change.
And then it's entrenched.
Sure.
And that's why I think he says multiple times, remember God in your youth.
Right.
And it's harder to do that than in verses 6 and 8. It's harder to do that as you get older.
Yeah, he's not specifically, he starts off saying, remember, but then, you know, he says, before the sun, in the day of the watchman. I mean, those all should be starting with the word remember, 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 remember. No, absolutely. those are all very, very good points. So very much tying in to the theme that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. So going on to verse 6, he says again, remember him before the silver cord is broken and the golden bowl is crushed. The pitcher by the well is shattered and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. So in verse 6, he's depicting a kind of the image of, at that time, the importance of having a functioning well for a family or a community. Once that cord is broken, bowl is crushed, and the cistern is crushed, your ability to reach the water, the ability to pull it up, and the ability to store it. He uses the word crushed, broken, and crushed, shattered. Kind of what I think he's touching on here is sort of how, the finality of life, but also how sudden and how quick life can be taken from you. He talks about the aging process to the young man, and these things are in front of you, but also, young man, and sadly a reality all of us have maybe experienced, the unexpected, quick taking of one's life, maybe in their youthful years. But then also just kind of reiterating that point of once death is here, death is here. There is no changing it. Once the cord is snapped, the bowl is shattered, broken. He's using that figurative language again. And then in verse 7, he's using some other verses to kind of make this point. He says, then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Verse 8, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. So I don't know if really this is figurative language. This is kind of Solomon just coming out and saying exactly how it is. But this would obviously be very familiar to a reader at that time who was familiar with Genesis and some of the other Old Testament passages and talking about dust and knowing that man was made from dust and to the dust they shall return and the soul returns to God. Kind of directly referencing Genesis 2 and the story of God actually creating man out of the dust. And then in the next chapter in Genesis 3, after Adam and Eve have sinned and God reminding Adam that you are that dust, you are going to return to the dust, but the soul will return to God. So Solomon kind of implementing that same reference and same language there, and then caps it off here with just that statement and the phrase that has been repeated multiple times throughout the book, the vanity of all vanities and all is vanity. And really trying to, as we get closer to the end of this chapter, really trying to make the point, I guess, to this young person that aging and death is inescapable. Living your life trying to ignore that or not think about it, willingly trying to blind yourself of it, is truly a vain and meaningless and hopeless way of living. So that's really the point he's trying to make there. In verse 9, in addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered, searched out, and arranged many proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words to write, and to write words of truth correctly. The words of the wise man are like goads, and the master of these collections are like well-driven nails. They are given by one shepherd. Kind of an interesting, I'll leave verse 12 there for a second. Kind of interesting here, when he's talking about, so it's obviously talking about Solomon, and sort of, I don't know, maybe an end of story summary, some sort of epilogue, but sort of giving credibility to his experience in being able to write this book and showing how seriously he took the task of pondering and really trying to obtain wisdom in this life and carefully look for and write the truth. In verse 11, though, or excuse me, actually that's in, let's see. Oh, yeah. It says there in verse 11, And the master of these collections are like well-driven nails. What is that phrase referring to? The masters of these collections.
Is it just skillful carpentry? I mean, are they just referring to carpentry, or is it referring to the nails that were driven for Jesus?
Maybe I should ask a better question. Kind of verses 9 through 11, talking about how he arranged all these many proverbs, and then the masters of these collections. I think he's kind of referring to some of, if not all, the material in the book of Proverbs, and all of the, these truths, these short, proverbial truths that he's put together. That's kind of the collection, I would think, that he's referencing, and one who can master them is like a well-driven nail into a structure that holds the structure together, has integrity, and has strength, and can withstand the vanities of life. Thought I had two hands. Sydney?
I take it that the words are the nails. The words of wisdom are the nails that anchor life.
The words themselves, absolutely. Thought I saw one more. Larry?
Sometimes if someone says something to me that strikes me, I'll actually go, oh, almost like I've been struck by that word. That's the go. And I think the second part of that is by selecting these, you've driven them where they need to go. In other words, these are the words that were needed at the time. And so that's the well-driven nails, the list of proverbs that are there.
Yeah, I mean, think of the purpose of a goat or a cattle rod or prong to move a herd along is to cause kind of some temporary discomfort to guide the sheep or the cattle in the area that, get them out of their area of comfort and move them along to an area that is better for them. That shepherd being, it says there, was given by one shepherd, capital S. He's referring to God. I mean, Solomon wrote these things, but Solomon's wisdom and his inspiration came obviously directly from God. But that is such a true statement. The words of a wise man are like goads, in the sense that when have you ever grown, or even, certainly in the sense of a spiritual context, when have you ever spiritually grown in a very comfortable and easy situation in your life? Or from a friend or a peer that is just doesn't challenge you in any kind of way, or you yourself don't challenge yourself or prong yourself to ask tough questions and grow. That's certainly what words of wisdom do. May not initially be comforting to us, kind of like a lot of the themes throughout this book, but when really thought about and pondered and accepted, really cause growth, and one to ponder and think about those things. So, okay, and then in verse 13, so wrap it up. He says, the conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything hidden, whether good or evil. So, obviously, probably a very well-known couple of verses that have been read probably several times, or many times throughout your lives. But it's kind of interesting. Solomon spent his entire life going on an incredible conquest and covering all different types of experiences, seeing all kinds of things throughout the world, good or bad, wisdom, folly, comparing the two, riches, a poor man, looking at everything truly under the sun. And he's sharing and has sprinkled in and peppered in different types of wisdom throughout the book, but really his ultimate conclusion is just simply this. And it's you kind of wonder as a reader, if you're looking for, someone who's looking for like the quick tips way to be a Christian and to succeed in life and succeed as a Christian and, take the shortcut. This is kind of like the sort of, I don't want to say underwhelming, but maybe dull answer to a person who's just looking for maybe the quick trips or quick tips of wisdom. Is the basic fundamental of you fear God and you keep his commandments. And it really does just boil down to that and finding purpose and meaning in this life. Does anyone have any comments on that? I've got a last couple slides to share. Janine.
Like the translation that says, "For this is the whole of man."
The whole, yeah. Yeah, some say the whole purpose, or but just the whole of man, and it whole duty of man. That's right, Robert.
To me, this is the most well-driven man in the book. Because you have a very simple point, but it has an extreme amount of depth to it. Because when you talk about those last two verses, fear God and keep his commandments, and why do we do that? Because everything that we do in life is going to be judged. And if we want to be judged correctly, we have to keep his commandments. Well, what else does that necessitate? Well, we have to know his commandments. We have to keep them. We have to fear them. There has to be amount of respect and reverence, but also as we get deeper into the commandments, there's love. The whole of, to me, and some people may disagree, but to me, the whole of the gospel is distilled down into those two verses. We fear God and we keep his commandments. We don't just fear God because we know there are other commandments about love. But you have to know it, you have to study it, you have to keep it. There's more in just that short phrase.
Yeah.
You have the totality of what it takes and what it means to follow after God. And to distill that down to a young person who is looking, and Solomon is trying to tell them, here's how you be successful in life, is I give you a short phrase that you're going to remember, but that has an absurd amount of depth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just to use his phrase, the most perfect, well-driven man in the whole world.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's interesting, that idea of fear. Fear God. And I guess maybe you don't really hear people really talk that way anymore in the general Christian world. Maybe it's love God, it's believe in God, all certainly good things. But fear God. And, it's kind of interesting. I guess whether we'd like to admit it or not, we kind of tend to respond and sort of center our lives around the things that we fear. And whether we kind of like it or not, or whether we sort of know it or acknowledge it or not. But that's really the ultimate question, is what do you truly fear in life? If you're someone who is living under the sun, do you solely care the most, or are you most fearful of what people might think about you? Well, then you will consume your life with trying to win the opinions of others. Are you most fearful of being poor or not having resources or things in life? Then you'll consume yourself with that, rat race of gaining riches. Are you fearful of experiencing pain? You just want to feel happiness and pleasure in this life. What is the central fear in your life? And I know that fear maybe carries a negative connotation with it, but you kind of have to look at it. Everyone fears something, and Solomon's making that point is you can fear one thing in this world, one thing in your life, and it's fear God. And like you're saying, Robert, true fear of God goes hand in hand with keeping his commandments. If you truly feared something, you would respond to it. And we all have fears, maybe consciously, unconsciously, whatever, and it would generate a response. So kind of that, I believe in God, faith is just belief, obedience is work, and that's all on you. Well, that's a whole different type of discussion, but fearing God should generate a response, and the response is keeping his commandments, and they go hand in hand. It's a circle in some sense. Judy.
And it's like, sadly, our world today, we're like the judges. We all are doing whatever seems right in our own eyes.
Right. I mean, and that truly is a state of the opposite of don't really fear God. People might acknowledge God, say, I believe in God. Oh, that man upstairs. And say a prayer before the game or something, whatever, and like that's all fine. But true fear of God in one's life, you will centralize your life around that fear in the sense that it generates a response because you know, I mean, it says there, why should you fear God? For he will bring every act into judgment, everything which is hidden, which is good, and which is or evil. And people don't really, they might know that from a factual standpoint, but they don't think about it. They don't think about and really acknowledge that reality. They don't fear it. And so that's ultimately what it comes down to. Dana.
Seems to me like this is one of the first things that people who are considering converting, or people who maybe you're working with, helping them to convert, or trying to make people understand what it's all about. This isn't the conclusion. This is step one.
It's sort of like he starts the book, vanity of all vanities, and he kind of comes full circle with it, and you can sort of just kind of go on repeat on this thing. As Robert said, this is kind of the cornerstone piece that can go in a million different directions for the gospel in and of itself, and that's why I think it's such a fascinating book. It touches on so many central themes that are, obviously before it, with characters like Abraham and Jacob, David, all the Old Testament characters, but certainly the stories to come in the New Testament, really centralized here, theme-wise, in this book. But to sort of wrap that up, just kind of sitting and thinking, just trying to share some of my own thoughts to sort of summarize what I take away from this book. The first being the obvious, that everything apart from God is vanity. Solomon has said it 1,000,000 times. But maybe like what you said, Dana, somebody who's trying to come to terms with what they believe, trying to understand God and the purpose of one's life, maybe the first step is to really understand, and look at the world for really what it is. It's vanity, it's meaningless, and that allows someone to then look somewhere else. Look instead of below, look above the sun. The second thing I take away is, if we fear God and keep his commandments, there is joy amongst the sorrow, peace amongst the confusion, and purpose in the mystery. So a lot of talk about confusion, pain, the tribulations, the mystery, the things that are unknown in this world. Fearing God and keeping his commandments provide the answer for those things while we're here on this earth, while we're going through this life under the sun. And then number 3, since there is an eternal accounting for everything we do, it's kind of a thought I had. Our lives have meaning and importance in the eyes of God, both for the present and for eternity. And this is the opposite, truly the opposite of believing that all is vanity or meaningless. That's kind of the irony of this book, is if you are truly someone who's dedicating yourself to following God, fearing God, and keeping his commandments, he said that he's going to bring every action and everything into account. You acknowledge that, you believe that, you take that very seriously, to the point you fear it and you're going to structure your life around it. Well, to me, that doesn't sound like a vain life, a meaningless life. Actually, it is very important. All of your actions, everything you do in private and in public, is not meaningless or vain at all. Even though we live in a world that is based off vanity, once someone who has sort of gone through that dimension and is looking past the sun, everything is important. Everything has purpose, because that person truly believes that everything they do, everything in their heart, everything in their mind, everything they do for their brother or sister in public or in private matters. It's going to be judged and be accounted for. It's a pretty scary and humbling thought for someone. I've been here for 30 years, and I can think about all the good and bad things that I've done in my life, and to think it's on a record somewhere. And someone who's lived 60 years or 90 years, it's on a record somewhere. All of a sudden, wait, that's actually really important. That's not vain. It's not meaningless. So hopefully didn't fog up your mind too much, and just trying to share my thoughts. I certainly appreciate and value everyone's comments and perspectives. Certainly been beneficial to me. I feel humbled and lucky to be able to walk through this class with you guys, those who've read this book or heard this class been taught numerous times and well before I was even born. So I appreciate everyone's patience and comments. So if you guys would like, let's close with a word of prayer. And then one quick reminder, Terry wanted me to remind the posters for the kids' classes in the hallways. If you can stay and help take them down, that'd be great. So let's close with a word of prayer. Dear God, we come to you now, acknowledging you as our almighty God, our creator, the creator of all things, and we are so humble and so thankful that you've left us such a writing and collection of thoughts and instructions in the book of Ecclesiastes. We pray, Lord, that over these last 12 weeks we're able to let these things penetrate our hearts and to dig into our mind and allow these things to sink into our daily lives, and not just while we're here, but while we're living day to day, Lord. And we pray that we reflect on the importance of living with a perspective above the sun and looking towards you and towards your Son. We're so thankful, Lord, for him and for your plan, for your mercy and your grace, for sending him and allowing us this hope, Lord, to look past this world, allow us to make peace with the things in this world, and to accept the truths that come with it, Lord, and know that nothing in this world could ever take us out of your hand. And we pray, Lord, that we can carry these things with us, remain strong and remain faithful. And it's in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, thank you, everybody.